Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the E-Learning Unlocked podcast. I'm Jill Chester. I'm the founder of Little Man Project. We're a bespoke development company that specialises in developing learning experiences for charities and the third sector. This podcast runs alongside our E-Learning Unlocked blended learning programme. This programme supports learning and development professionals in charities to learn how to design effective e-learning for their staff and volunteers. In this second episode, we're going to be talking about the importance of asking open questions to ensure that you really understand what problem a new piece of e-learning is trying to solve for the organisation and, more importantly, for your learners.
So in this episode, I'm joined by Gemma Towersey from MindTools. I first met Gemma over 10 years ago when she was working at Calidus, which has offices just up the road from us. Gemma is now a learning experience consultant at MindTools and one of the co-hosts of the MindTools L&D podcast, which coincidentally is my favourite podcast. So thank you so much for joining me today, Gemma. I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty intimidated about your experience on the podcasting compared to my novice speak. But thank you so much for giving me your time.
Thanks for inviting me, Jill. I'm so excited to be here.
So I thought if we could start by kind of explaining what you do, what a learning experience consultant is, and kind of your journey to becoming a learning consultant, bearing in mind, I know you've done some really cool stuff and been some cool places along the way.
Yes. So a learning experience consultant has definitely been part of an evolution of the role of instructional designer, I guess. So at the moment now, I spend much more of my time talking to prospective and current clients about their challenges and proposing effective solutions and ways to evaluate those solutions. So I'm much more kind of front end, beginning of the process. I still do a lot of the project management that to get through like bigger, more complex programs.
Yeah.
But now I'm really focused on that upfront, really kind of digging into solving problems and really identifying the problems and identifying the right problems, and then doing the kind of high level learning design, and then those projects might then go to other people in my team to develop. But generally the bigger projects stay with me.
And so you're having to come up with ideas on the fly when you're digging down into the why to kind of get how open they are to some of the ideas that you might come up with.
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time just asking loads and loads of questions and asking for, really exploring the gaps, why those gaps are there, asking for really proof of those.
Yeah.
Proof of where the problems are, because often people are trying to solve the wrong problems or problems that are a bit sort of fuzzy. So really kind of help clients get clear on what it is they're trying to do, how that's actually related to what they're trying to achieve in the business as a whole. So helping learning teams connect all the things that they're trying to do with the bigger kind of goals or outcomes for the business, and then sort of really thinking about like what metrics they might use to measure success. Right, what would happen if we didn't do anything?
Yeah,
as well. That's often a good question to ask. Often kind of makes them really clear on whether or not there is a problem and whether it's significant enough to warrant putting or even needing learning or putting money towards a particular solution, figuring out whether the problem can be solved wholly by learning, and then helping the client to kind of pick apart which bits might not be. If there's environmental issues or like a system problem there, no amount of learning is going to, maybe it might sort of plug a gap or, maybe patch over a problem, but ultimately there's things in businesses that learning will never solve. And then like the kind of is helping them to understand whether or not what they actually need is sort of pitched at the kind of knowledge decision, that sort of kind of level of learning, or whether they have the time and the money to kind of go right up to actually getting people to practice and do the whole, like all the stuff that you need to put in to make sure that people transfer what they learn into what they do at work.
Yeah.
So there's quite a distinction, and that often takes more time and money to get to that point. But perhaps that transfer piece, they're doing something internally around that. Maybe that is just supporting them with some triads or with some coaching, or maybe. So that's what I spend my time doing, is it's helping them think through that whole piece rather than just that little nugget of, we need a short course on data awareness or something.
So it's more holistic than an instructional designer who would tend to be. A good instructional designer will be looking at the why and what's the solution, but you're more, okay, well, this could be coaching instead of e-learning, as opposed to me, where I would say, this is probably coaching, so I'll give that back to you. Whereas you can solve all of
support.
the...
Where we can support, we offer that support, and then we'll just help them think through that and make sure that they're clear about that whole journey. And then the evaluation piece as well, try and help them think through how we can evaluate. And then we work with internal team. We've got an internal research team, research and insights team, and they help us to measure behaviour change and impact as well with valid and reliable surveys and interviews and
good data,
all that good stuff. So and then contributing to proposals and tenders and that sales kind of activity. So that's where I spend a lot of my time. But generally, like a good instructional designer would be asking those questions too.
Yeah, but maybe not at the deeper level that you're able to go. Yeah. So your journey, because I knew you when you started out as an ID, and I knew that you worked in publishing before that. Is that right?
I did educational publishing at Nelson Thorns in Cheltenham, which is now sadly no longer in their digital learning team. So I put together digital assets that supported AQA qualifications.
Right.
So I specialised a lot in modern languages, modern foreign languages. So I'd go and do audio recordings in German and watch all these kids in these recording studios recording little snippets that then supported activities in the textbook. So it was a lot of just kind of individual assets that I'd put together.
Right.
It'd be like worksheets or the kind of digital worksheets or whatever it took, whatever had been spec'd out.
Yeah.
That was my very first
And when
job.
was this?
That was a long time ago. So that
15?
was 2014, 15. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And then perhaps even earlier. I was there for a few years. And then I joined, that would have been a lot earlier. That would have been 2007, 2008. Yeah, when I graduated. And then Calidus was 10 years ago.
Yep.
And
I had to dig back to find the emails from us to see when we were talking when you were at Calidus.
So and then from there I went, I was there for 5 years. And then from there I went to New Zealand. So I had a short but wonderful stint working as an instructional designer at Kineo in their office in Wellington, which also is sadly not there anymore. They do have a presence in New Zealand, but not where I was.
So when you leave, they shut down. Is this what we're saying, Gemma?
Yeah. I think they did get bigger, and then they had a presence in Australia as well, which I think they still have. So that was great. Loved my time in New Zealand, and then came to Edinburgh. I had a year as a freelancer where I was freelancing for various companies in the UK, but also in New Zealand, which was tricky time-wise, very difficult trying to scope at midnight. So that was, I did enjoy the freelancing life to a certain extent, but I was quite glad to join the Good Practice Custom team in 2016. And then I've stayed and evolved through all the different company evolutions.
It has grown a lot, hasn't it?
Good Practice, and then Emerald Works, and then we're now MindTools. So and been here a long time. Yeah.
So just going back to that kind of creative process. So you've done that piece where you're kind of talking to them and you have identified that they actually do have a learning need that you think would be well served with e-learning.
Mm-hmm.
What, in terms of that creative process that you go to in general, maybe let's step back, in general, what would you go through? I do think that, for new designers, that's potentially quite a mysterious area because it's hard to know whether or not, how do you come up with the ideas? You know the nuts and bolts of building, you've worked with a subject expert, but there's this bit in the middle of this creative experience. What does creativity mean to you, and how do you come up with the ideas? I suppose it might be quite natural now after, so many years of doing this, but what do you kind of use to keep being creative and coming up with new ideas and new spark?
Yeah, I think that is what creativity means to me. I mean, we're not writing our own novel or creating an animation on a topic of our own choice. There are boundaries, and you're always starting with your outcomes. So what is it that you're trying to achieve? So you really think about those and using learning design principles to guide you with how you present that and how you get learners to interact, and think about, be really conscious about their learning process and how they're taking that back into their workplace. So you've got those kind of boundaries, and you've also maybe got a budgetary boundary as well. You've got all sorts of technology boundaries. But creativity, I guess, is what can we do within those boundaries to create something that's maybe challenge assumptions, but also like surprise and delight people. I think that's how I try and think about it. How can people often come to e-learning with a bit of dread.
Yeah. I often apologise when I tell people what I do for a living.
Yeah.
Because there's so much bad stuff out there.
Exactly. So what can you use from or like your walk of life and all the things that you do outside of work maybe that might help to bring, I don't want to say entertainment, but how that kind of, that surprise and just that kind of attracting attention, and getting people to feel emotional about what they're learning, because often that makes it more memorable to start with, and helps people connect to what you're trying to say and gets to like the core of them, helps them make them feel seen as well. So we use a whole kind of raft of techniques, I guess, to internally in our team to make sure that we're not getting stuck in a rut as well, because often if you've done these things, it's like, oh, we can just use that again, or that little series of interactions or whatever. But so we often have, once we've done this sort of scoping part of our process where we've got our learning outcomes sketched out and we know exactly what the client's trying to achieve, what we're trying to achieve, we will call an emergency meeting, a brainstorm meeting, and it'll be a really rapid brainstorm. So we might just take whoever's available in the team at that moment to just jump on a call, and we'll present the context and the outcomes, and we'll just come up with as many ideas as we possibly can. So we often use Miro for this. Love a bit of Miro action. It's great. Loads of post-its, as many ideas, and then people might just have like threads of ideas, so we can dig in. I mean, we're all quite well practiced at asking questions, so it's like, there's a little thread or a little glimmer of an idea, and it's like, oh, what do you mean by that? Give us an example. Or what happens if we had no constraints with the budget? Like, what's the most extravagant thing we could do with this? Or what's the least amount of work we could do? Well, not the amount of work, but what's the sort of simplest thing we could do to achieve that outcome? Often we are working with stories or scenarios, because we know that they're a really good way to either demonstrate various behaviours or even to test people's decisions with behaviours. So we often know that there's a story in there. So we always think about what are we trying to kind of get people to do differently. I mean, that's where we always start with even getting to our outcomes. So from there, we might be thinking, okay, well, could we go through, maybe we're trying to train a process or people to kind of change the way they do part of a process. So, how can we tell that story? Do we need to tell it in a linear way? Do we need to make them episodic? Do we need to see different characters doing different things because maybe the audience has got lots of different roles? What are the mistakes that people make in real life? And this is where I think the most kind of creative inspiration comes from the clients themselves, or if you get to talk to learners, often you hear stories you'll be able to imagine.
Yeah.
So we often ask, what are the most common mistakes? What would an expert do that a novice wouldn't? How did that expert become an expert? Like, what were the steps that they took? What were the mistakes that they made? What would they like to know now that they didn't know before? How would they help a novice if they were sat next to them? Yeah, so that's often where kind of our main inspiration comes from. And then because there's sort of 10 of us in the team now, and we all watch different TV shows, film. So we draw on those ideas as well if we've seen something that we think, oh yeah, we could tell a story using that technique, or that visual technique, or We've used poems before. Poems are a great way of sort of like introducing things, or just like, really unusual to hear a quirky poem in the middle of a piece of e-learning, or, a whole course just written as a piece of dialogue. And then you kind of interrupt that dialogue as you go through a conversation. So, what are the different techniques you can use to tell stories? And there's just hundreds of them. So yeah, lots and lots of questions. I try and expose myself to lots of different like types of media. I subscribe to a magazine. It's a running magazine because I'm a really keen runner, but it contains stories and all sorts of different articles and poems, factual pieces written by people in the running community around the world. But they're paired with illustrations by graphic designers all around the world as well. So the whole magazine is just a quarterly, but it's packed with these beautifully illustrated pieces of writing. Yeah, they're all completely different. So I keep all of them and I flick through and I think, well, if I want a different graphical style or a way of writing them, use those sorts of things as inspiration as well.
We actually took a pack of magazines on our away day and literally got everyone to cut them up with scissors and create kind of collages of ideas, because that sounds brilliant. So what sort of, like, if you could name 5 creative things without telling us any dark secrets, like what kind of things have you done which you thought, oh, that's, I've loved that was so cool that we did, that was, I felt was really creative in terms of an approach?
Well, use different types of, I guess, pushing technology and using different types of visual techniques. Like we've done 360 videos before with Google.
Yep.
You get the Google glasses. So if you look at this piece of e-learning or this video in the e-learning page that we built it in, and use it on a desktop, you can use your mouse to spin around the video, but you can also play it on your mobile and then watch it in 360 video and turn around, and you get to like meet the people in the video. So it's quite cool. Really like doing that. And similar, in that same project, we did a really funky animation. The brand was really out there, so we wrote an animation script that it was really quite out there, but because the brand allowed that, and we just picked words out of their brand, and it was you wouldn't normally hear that in a corporate piece of e-learning, but it really went to town. So I like doing that. I love writing animation scripts. That's one of my favorite things to do. You can just be really bold.
I can see by your face how much you enjoyed that.
I loved it. Had a great animator working on it as well. They just picked out these really bold words and just went for that.
I think it also picks up on what you were saying earlier when you were saying, we don't want to just repeat, because I think the thing for us is that you can repeat because clients don't see each other's work. And what's so important of not to repeat is for your own benefit. For me, it's about my team having a new spark and a new excitement about what they're doing. If you are just, if you're doing a particular topic that's quite common and you do the same approach, then that shows in what you produce because you lose some of the interest. So we, like you say, we always try and do something different. You might reuse an interaction, but it's always got to be different and look different and feel different, because otherwise we dry up. As I think the creativity is when we're challenged, and when we do new things, that's when it becomes even better, and you build and things are, and you have fun. I think for me, creativity is so much about having fun as well. For us, I feel that our content is better when we've had fun building it. I think I can kind of see when it's been difficult to build for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Cool.
For sure.
So in terms of the process, you've mentioned, having this kind of everybody join me quick. We need to do a quick brainstorm. Kind of what is the process from, you've done all of that hard work with the client, not hard work, but, you've worked with the client to find out all those things that they need, the why. And then you've decided it's e-learning, you've got some sort of source. What's the kind of steps that you follow to then get to the end point of actually starting to build that e-learning, or someone build that e-learning?
So all those scoping calls that we have, an idea generation ends up in a document that we give as our first deliverable to clients, and that's called the outcomes framework or scoping document. That's where we capture everything that we've learned, or the details about who the learners are, or the gaps, the outcomes, the success measures, how we're going to evaluate it, delivery, and then a high level breakdown of what that piece of e-learning is going to contain. A really high level, but aligned with the activity in the learning. So we've got an outcome. So what activity can we have in there that's going to help people practice? And then the minimum amount of content that we need in order for someone to actually do that activity and know how to do it in the real world. So that's all stated in a Word document, and that goes to the client. So that all just gets documented there. And then from there, we work with the subject matter expert to draw out all of that content. So we might be given content up front, but often we need more. Might be more stories, more examples, screenshots, whatever it might be, just to get that content. So we work really closely with subject matter experts. And I mean, we sometimes, the scoping might also involve doing focus groups as well with learners and managers. So all of that gets just documented and captured, and then we can go from there to create the wireframe. And then wireframe becomes an alpha build with all the lovely graphics in it, and then that gets reviewed, and then it goes to beta, and then final. It's just like that. We all know that doesn't happen, but that's the idea.
There's
many iterations. There's iterations within, but that's broadly.
So in effect, you're kind of doing your creative process very early on, kind of straight away after the kickoff, because we tend to do it where we have that kickoff meeting. We know what the outcomes are and do that, but then we would then go away and ask for the source based on what we need. So kind of similar to you. But we don't tend to document up front. We tend to wait for the source to come. So that's interesting that you're giving them a sense of what it will be as a tangible asset at the end. It's going to be a game, and it's going to be, and you're doing that right up front. And do you talk to them about that in the kickoff meeting, or do you, are you pitching ideas, just because of through the conversation, or is that something or a mix?
I do, definitely. In some conversations, I definitely test out ideas. Try not to solutionize up front, so try not to suggest anything until I've got at least a really good understanding of what the problem is and where the problems are coming from. Because who knows, I try not to plant an idea. Sometimes clients come with us knowing exactly what they want, but again, it's worth digging into that and
that's
really challenging that assumption. So I don't tend to suggest anything until we've got a really clear idea that actually learning is going to solve the problem. But then from there, like I say, I do ask clients about what goes wrong, what are the missteps, what are any examples? Can they give us any examples? Can we speak to people that have experienced whatever it is that they're talking about? Can we tell a story in this way? Does it work? Like if I had an idea about I don't know, some rules or guidelines affect lots of different types of roles in the organization. Well, maybe there's a flow. Maybe something comes into one team, then flows to another team, and then comes. So I test out those ideas, and I also test out appetite for really wild types of solutions. So would a game work? Would there be time to do that? Obviously there's so many restrictions. If you've only got a month to produce something, then you can't necessarily make a big digital game or a big app. So I think it's understanding how important it is for that organization, and then, like I say, how what kind of level are we trying to get to? Are we trying to get learners to the point where they've completely automated this new behavior? In which case, we've really got to go. We've got to go big. So I definitely test out ideas. Definitely. Some clients surprise us. Some clients have asked us for a particular visual approach that I would have never expected them to go for. So sometimes you get a surprising ask for something really creative that you'd So I have my assumptions have been challenged in that direction too.
And presumably you're working with clients often, more than once. So you start to build a relationship with them, and then they trust you more, or they're more, we found that when we work with people regularly, they will be more open to other ideas because they've learned to trust you. That the last slightly weird idea you had was really worked. So the crazy one you've got now, they're kind of okay.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll go with it.
Building a good rapport is everything, I think.
So if you, casting your mind back to when you started at Calidus as a kind of a full-on e-learning ID, if you could say now what you know to that person, what would be your advice? Because most of the people on the e-learning Unlock program are starting out. So what would be the advice you'd give them in terms of how to do the right thing in this area?
I just think ask more questions and don't worry about asking not stupid questions, but if you think, I'm not quite sure I know enough about that, or not quite sure that this is everything, just keep asking questions. I just think back then perhaps I'd take maybe the first answer at face value and then maybe not dig a bit deeper, but there's always really good open questions like, tell me a bit more about that, or like little prompts. That's not necessarily a question, but a little prompt that you can ask for a little bit more, or give me some examples, or like, how do you know that? And so I think like having a whole developing your open question bank is already like something I think I would have liked to have got to a bit quicker back then. But that takes some confidence, particularly if you only meeting someone for the first time.
And here's one then. What do you do when the subject matter expert doesn't answer those questions? Like, what happens when they just say, we just know, or we've talked to a few people and this is what we know? Like, how is it really down to the open questions that you're asking and waiting? Like, just not letting them get away with no answers? Just kind of like, what do you do in that situation?
Or asking to speak to someone else if there's someone else that's better placed, or speaking to maybe new starters, speaking to people that have been in the business for a long time in that role, or maybe asking them to explain how they go about something. Pretend like I'm a learner. How would you, or I've just started, how would you explain or show someone that in real life? Because often we are talking about what you're actually doing in your day job, and some, when you've been doing it for so long, it is easy to forget how you actually do it, and not pick apart those steps. But if you can always ask someone to, let's break it down. When you first start at this point, then what do you do, and then what do you do? What things go wrong a lot? How do you avoid those pitfalls? I think just keep asking. It is tricky when you don't get the answers that you want to start with.
I'm going to put you on the spot a bit now. When you're doing compliance stuff, so let's say you've been asked to do a data protection course, or whistleblowing, or something that. How do you get around subject experts whose answer to why do you need this is because we need to be compliant? Because that's not an answer. Anyone can create a data protection course based on we just need one, because all you're doing is ticking the box of having one. So what do you do with them where, does this happen to you? And, what do you do where you kind of say, okay, but why? Well, because the government says, but why? You can't just keep saying why on that one, because they won't go anywhere, because to them it's a binary, it's the law, so that's what I need to do. So how do you stop building e-learning that's just ticking a box for compliance and build something that actually is meaningful for the learner?
Compliance courses, I feel like they're actually really important, because the consequences of not following the policies that they've put in based on the laws the policies and processes that hopefully those companies have are really serious.
Yeah.
So I think asking like what bad things might happen to the individuals if they don't, what bad things might happen to your company, how could, and it's thinking through like what would happen to your customers, what would happen if that individual was fined or was like what happens to the global order if you don't comply, and then picking it apart and showing those consequences. I think that's really important to do when you're trying to get across the gravity of...
So maybe focusing more on why there's compliance in this area in the first place, rather... Yeah, cool. And do you ever try to work out how to make the learner care about compliance? Because, of the things that you've done that's, okay, well, we know that bad things will happen to the organisation, but will bad things happen to me as a member of staff?
Oh, yeah. I think that's always a good way to frame it, even if it's not so in like a really direct way of saying it. But there's always two sides to compliance, aren't there? There's loads of bad things that might happen if you don't comply. But similarly, often the processes and the policies that are in place because of that law make everyone's lives actually a bit easier. So, and that's another compelling reason. Yeah. It's like the carrot and the stick, isn't it? So I think you have to show that actually this has been, this by following these rules and guidelines, everyone knows where they stand, everyone knows what it should be, and it's actually just easier to do it like that. So I think you've got to find the good things in people's jobs and help just to show them that this is like the path of least resistance, perhaps. Yeah.
And if you're going to have to do a compliance course, it might as well also make your life easier afterwards.
Help,
Cool.
It's just part of what you do as a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I genuinely think that we don't hear enough from people actually doing this job in terms of how they do it and what they do, and I love that advice around the questioning and also not circumventing, but asking more, getting more people involved, not just those people who are directly in front of you, presented by the like as a subject matter expert, but actually saying, no, I need to talk to other people. What you've suggested is really powerful, and I think that will make a real difference. And also is something that if you're working internally to an organisation is really much easier. I think, me and you, we have to kind of beg, borrow and steal to get access to those people. Whereas, internally they can just maybe jump on a Teams call and say, can we chat? What do you do here? Why do you do it? Yeah. So maybe that's quite encouraging to people who are working internally.
Absolutely. Just find out what's important to people, like what's meaningful, what's hard for people. Yeah, and if you've got access to that directly, then
and maybe always thinking about the story, like you said, when you're talking to them, what stories are coming out for you? If you go in thinking I need a story in that conversation. I always say that when you do face-to-face training, if it wasn't for the trainer, you'd just be given a book, wouldn't you? You'd just given the PowerPoint. Yeah. So it's the stories that they say. So this is what we do, and I'll tell you the story about when this happened to me, and that's when that brings what's on the screen to life.
Yep.
And so, you get that off them when you're talking to them, and maybe you can create an entire piece of e-learning just based on the crazy stories you get told about compliance.
Absolutely. So many good stories. I mean, some horrifying stories that, that they're all in there, and it discourages people from not doing the right things. But on the other, you can really show how just doing the right thing is probably a lot easier anyway. So
amazing.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you so much. That was really enlightening.
Very welcome.
Brilliant. Thank you.